Hello everyone, welcome to another video, and in today's episode we're just going to talk about the most important online metrics, business e-commerce metrics specifically, that you have to track on a monthly basis if you want to know if your store is heading in the right direction. I think a lot of business owners are just not aware that they have to keep an eye on all of these, I would say KPIs, key performance indicators. They are essentially what is going to help you determine if your business is heading in the right direction or not. And at the same time, they are there to guide you in fixing what could be potentially wrong. They are symptoms to tell you where the business is not as healthy as it should be. And by understanding these metrics, it will indicate what symptoms are wrong with the business should you want to fix that, so that you can actually build something profitable and sustainable for yourself. If you like business and marketing content like this, then I would encourage you to like and subscribe and click on the bell so you can be notified about the next video. Just a disclaimer, when it comes to metrics, there are numerous, hundreds of different metrics that you can measure. And I think in my mind, these kind of metrics fall under two types of categories. You get the business orientated metrics and then the marketing orientated metrics, and obviously both are important. But this is specifically, I would say, my top 10 business orientated metrics that a business owner needs to be aware of and needs to be analyzing in order to run a healthy business. Now, yes, there will be supporting metrics that a marketing individual or an agency or a consultant or someone on your team might be more aware of, but in this case, they are not part of this video, and we will maybe make another video on that at a later stage. So the first thing that you should be very cognizant of when it comes to your business strategy, and this is something that you should look into on a monthly basis, if not maybe at least quarterly, is markup. So a markup is basically the amount of money that you add on top of the cost of the product, so the cost of goods. So if the cost of good was $100 and you've added another $100 on top of that, then the retail price is now $200, but the cost of good was $100, so the markup will be 100%. And if you have an online business, you want to make sure that your markup is anything between 100 to 200% or more. We have some of our own stores with a markup of 250 plus, because that just means that you've got more profit left after the actual sale of the product. Cool. So the second metric that you want to track on a monthly basis and make sure that this is in check is your gross profit percentage, or your GP percentage. And this is just basically what percentage of profit is left if you sold the product. So if the product is $200 as per the previous example, and we minus the cost of goods of 100 Rand, then essentially we're making 100 Rand profit, and 100 Rand profit of 200 is 50%. So that gives us a GP of 50%, if we focus on the example before. Now, an online store, in my opinion, should aim for a GP of at least 40% or more. If it's going to be less than that, then if you had to include your operating expenses, things can get very, very lean, and not in a good way. You're going to have very little profit left in order to pay staff, salaries, warehousing, rent, and everything else that you need to, not mentioning the amount of money that it actually takes to acquire a customer. So if you don't have a GP of 40% or more, it's going to be quite tricky to build an online store from scratch profitably. And I think it's not that it's not possible, but at the same time, it is going to be a little bit more difficult than a store that has a healthy gross margin percentage, obviously. So the third metric would be our CAC, which is basically the cost of acquiring a customer. And this is just the amount of money that you have to invest in order to get one customer to buy a product from you. Right, so how you calculate this is actually pretty simple. You just take your total customers for that month. So let's say you had 3 customers and you spent 3,000 Rand on marketing. Then you take your marketing cost, which is 3K, and you divide that by your 3 customers, and then you get 1,000 Rand a customer. So that's what it's costing your business to get one single customer. Now, the reason this is so important is because if you don't understand what it's costing you to acquire a customer, and you don't know what profit you're making on every single sale, you're not really going to be able to identify whether you are moving forward or backwards as a business. And that brings us to the fourth metric that I think is pretty crucial to measure, and that's your lifetime value of a customer. And that's just basically the total money that each customer gives you over time. So let's say this customer bought from you in month 1 and he spent $100, and then he came back in month 2 again, and he gave you another $100, and then he came back in. He didn't go back in month 3, but he came back maybe in month 4, and he gave you $50. Then the LTV of this will be $100 plus $100 plus $50, which then is $250. So that is basically just your LTV at the end of the day. It's the total value of a customer to the business, and you can do this over any time frame. You can calculate this over 3, 6, 9, 12, total lifetime of the business. Doesn't really matter, but if you say LTV, it's not applicable to a specific timeline. You need to decide the timeline. So you say, what is the LTV of 3 months? Well, of 3 months, it's technically only $200 because he didn't buy in the 3rd month. But over 4 months, it is $250, and that is essentially, basically what LTV means. Now, if you want to calculate your LTV, then you take your total orders and you divide that by the total customers, and then you multiply that by your average order value, which we're going to discuss a little bit later. And then you're going to get your LTV. So remember that for later. Right, moving on to metric number 5. It is what we call CRR, and that is your customer repeat rate. You see, there are only 2 ways to really build a business, and that's to go and find new customers every month, and at the same time, you have to bring them back so they can continue spending money with you. And doing both is essential to and doing both is really what is essential to growth. And customer repeat rate basically gives us an indication of this part over there, as what percentage of the new customers that we found comes back after they've bought from us. And this metric is very crucial, purely because if you have a very low customer repeat rate, then the question is, do you have a good business? Is the product good? Is the service good? Is the quality of the product? Why are people not coming back? Because the higher you can get this, the more profitable it will actually be for the business, because revenue will start to compound essentially. If you want to calculate your customer repeat rate, then it's basically your total customers, and that is timed by your order frequency. And so order frequency is basically just how often people buy, or how often a specific customer buys. And how you calculate order frequency is basically just orders divided by customers. That's going to give you order frequency. So if you have 120 orders but 100 customers, then your order frequency is basically 1.2. So a simple way of just then finding out what your customer repeat rate is basically that 2 is basically 20%. That resembles 20%. That means out of all the customers, 20% are basically coming back, which is really good because the benchmark is between, I'd say, 20 and 30% in my own opinion. All right, we're halfway through the list. Next up, we have average order value, and that is basically just what the average transaction is worth. So the average transaction on the store, the average order on the store, what is that worth? But I have seen most stores have an average of about 650, around there, 650 to 1,000 Rand. I'd say that would be ballpark figures. Now Shopify should give you this metric, but if you don't have it, a simple way to calculate it is basically just total revenue, and we divide that by the total customers. So if total revenue is 100k and you had roughly, let's say, 250 customers, then that becomes 400 Rand an average order value. Now remember, we said earlier that we're going to take your average order value to calculate LTV. So if you wanted to calculate that, then it's basically just taking your order frequency, and let's say that's 1.2 times 400, which is the average order value. That becomes roughly 480. And there you have it, your LTV calculated. Right, number 7, we're looking at the metric called conversion rate. Now, I would say these are all technically marketing metrics, but if you run an e-commerce business, then they are actually seen as primarily business metrics, in my opinion. And conversion rate is just as important, because all this is the amount of 100 people that actually buys from you. So what percentage of those every 100 visitors buy something from the store? And the average store has a conversion rate of about 0.8 to 1.2%. And if you can get to the 2% mark, then you actually have the potential to create a top 1% online store in South Africa. So another metric that's technically a marketing metric, but we're going to include it in the business metrics, is something called ROAS. And this is basically just the amount of money you make back from advertising. So if you've made 100K back on, for example, 50K marketing budget, hopefully you do a little bit more than that in terms of ROAS, then you have technically 100K divided by 50K, which is 2. So you have a 2x ROAS. That means for every 1 Rand you spent, you get 2 Rand revenue back. Now that sounds very exciting, but this is obviously before all expenses. This is before cost of goods, additional expenses, etc. So you want this number obviously to be as high as possible. If it is higher, it means you have a higher chance of making profit, and if it's lower, you are going to have a lower chance of making profit. This is also different for all kinds of industries. In my opinion, we've seen stores with as high as 50x ROAS, and we've seen ones as low as 1.5x all be profitable. But it also depends on the number of sales that you do and the total revenue at the end of the day as well. So there's no real way to say, hey, this is the best ROAS for your business, unless you understand the industry, the size of the business, the amount of money that you're spending, etc. Just a disclaimer on ROAS, that's basically the amount of money that you're spending today versus what you're getting back in revenue, and it can be seen as a short-term metric or a vague metric because it doesn't really indicate the health of the business in terms of profit. That's why we like to focus on POAS, which is basically profit on ad spend, which is basically the amount of money you made back in revenue minus all your expenses. And let's say after 100K and expenses, you've got 50K left, then you deduct or divide that by the 50K marketing expenses, and now you have a 1x POAS, which means that you're making 1 Rand back in profit for every 1 Rand basically you are spending. So if I spend 1 Rand, I get 1 Rand back in profit, and now I can take, let's say for hypothetical reasons, take 50% of that, put it back in savings, and I take the other 50 and I scale the business with it. And that's really how you can go about scaling profitably, because this is profit after you've spent the money on marketing. And that brings us to our last and final and most important metric, which is basically net profit percentage. And that's basically just the total percentage of profit we make after we've paid everything we needed to pay in the business. And you would ideally want that to be as high as possible, because the higher, the more profit you're obviously putting away. And we've seen that the average business in South Africa has an 11% net profit margin. So that means if you have a 100K business, you're going to make 11K net profit. That's after paying everything you needed to pay. So that's just a rough idea. We have seen stores, 2 of our own stores actually run on, I'd say, 25 to 30%. That's because those stores are very lean. We utilize resources, so there's not a lot of staff and salaries that goes into it. And ideally, these stores get very scalable because of the fact that we can streamline it that way. But most businesses sit around this mark, and measuring that metric is extremely crucial, because that's the only way to know if you're actually building something sustainable for yourself. So there you have it, the 10 business metrics for online businesses, e-commerce businesses specifically, that I think you should be measuring monthly, if not at least minimum every 3 months, to understand what's happening in your business. I look at these things literally every 14 days to make sure that everything is still heading in the right direction, and I recommend that you do too. Hope there was value in this video. Like and share, comment, let me know what you think, and remember to subscribe for more if you found this valuable. Cheers.